A CEO laughed at a black billionaire. She smiled, then bought his company, the room that forgot her name. The morning Nadia Okafor walked into the Crestline Capital building, she carried three things: a leather portfolio worn soft at the corners, a presentation she had worked on for 11 days straight, and a quiet, unshakable belief that good work speaks for itself. She was wrong about that last part. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was smooth and silent. Nadia adjusted the collar of her blazer, deep burgundy, pressed crisp, and checked her reflection in the polished steel doors. She looked exactly like what she was, a sharp financial analyst with 7 years of work behind her, a woman who had built models that saved 2 divisions from collapse and never once asked for credit by name. She told herself that today would be different. The conference room was already full when she arrived. 12 people around a long walnut table, most of them white men in dark suits. A few assistants lined against the wall with tablets in their hands. At the head of the table sat Harlan Cross, CEO of Crestline Capital, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same stone as his confidence. Harlan didn't look up when Nadia walked in. She found her seat near the middle of the table and set her portfolio down quietly. To her left sat Preston Dale, the VP of Strategic Partnerships, who gave her the kind of glance you give a door you're not sure leads anywhere. To her right was an empty chair. "We'll begin in 3 minutes," said Harlan's assistant, a woman named Petra who moved through the room like she had been trained never to make a sound. Nadia opened her portfolio and reviewed her notes one last time. The proposal was clean. The numbers were right. She had stress-tested the projections with 4 different models, and every single one pointed in the same direction. The Meridian acquisition was the right move, but only if Crestline restructured the debt ratio first. Nadia had found a path that no one else on the team had mapped. She was certain of it. She was also certain that she was the only black woman in the room. That wasn't unusual. It had never been unusual. She had learned a long time ago to carry that awareness, the same way you carry a stone in your shoe on a long walk. You feel it, you note it, you keep going. The meeting opened without ceremony. Harlan tapped a pen against the table twice. The room quieted, and one by one the senior analysts gave their updates. Numbers, charts, projections. The language of money spoken in the dialect of men who assumed they would always be the ones speaking it. Then Petra nodded toward Nadia. She stood. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I'm Nadia Okafor, senior analyst on the Meridian file. I want to walk you through a revised approach to the acquisition structure, one that I believe addresses the leverage risk the current model is carrying." She clicked to her first slide. For the next 4 minutes, she spoke without notes. She walked them through the debt exposure, the revised timeline, the risk-adjusted returns. She had practiced this 40 times. She knew every number by heart. No one interrupted her. That was the first sign. When she finished and looked around the table, expecting questions, what she got instead was silence. The kind of silence that isn't neutral. The kind that has already made a decision and is just waiting for the room to catch up. Harlan Cross leaned back in his chair and smiled. It was not a kind smile. "That was," he began, and then he laughed. A short, sharp sound, like a door slamming. "That was something." Preston Dale chuckled. A few others shifted in their seats, not laughing, not defending her either. "Ms. Okafor," Harlan said, settling into the name like it was something he'd found inconvenient. "What you've just described is essentially a restructure of a plan that our senior team spent 4 months developing. Are you suggesting they got it wrong?" "I'm suggesting there's a gap in the leverage modeling that creates real downside risk," Nadia said. Her voice didn't waver. "The numbers support it." "The numbers?" He smiled again. "Right." He turned to the room. "Anyone want to explain to Ms. Okafor why the numbers she's looking at are incomplete?" A man named Gerald, white-haired and deliberate, cleared his throat. "The secondary debt tranche was restructured last Tuesday. The file wasn't updated in the shared drive." He didn't look at Nadia when he said it. "It's an internal communication issue." An internal communication issue. Nadia held very still. She had not been sent the updated file. She had built her entire presentation on data, that was 11 days out of date, and no one had told her. Not her manager, not Preston, not anyone whose job it was to keep the team aligned. But the way Harlan was looking at her, you would have thought she had invented the numbers herself. "So," he said pleasantly, "you spent how long on this?" 11 days, she said. 11 days. He repeated it slowly, savoring it. On a proposal built on outdated information. "That is," he gestured vaguely at the room, "that is not what we need at this level, Ms. Okafor." "I wasn't given the updated file," she said. "Everyone on the senior team had access to it. I didn't receive it." "Then perhaps," Harlan said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle, which was worse, "that tells us something about where you are on the senior team." The room went very quiet. Nadia's hands were flat on the table. She felt the leather of her portfolio under her fingertips, smooth and worn, and she thought about the 11 days she had spent at her kitchen table after midnight, building something she believed in, and she made a decision not to cry. Not here. Not in front of this man. "I'd like to review the updated file and resubmit," she said. Harlan shook his head, almost sympathetically. "I think what would be best," he said, "is if we reassigned the Meridian file to Preston's team. And I think it's time for us to have a broader conversation about your fit here. Broader conversation about your fit." She knew what that meant. 2 hours later, she was in HR. The woman across the desk had kind eyes and a rehearsed voice and a folder that already had Nadia's name on the tab. The process was clean and fast, the way these things are when someone has already decided. Severance. 2 weeks. Say standard non-disclosure attached. Nadia signed where she was told to sign. She carried her things out in a canvas tote bag, a mug, a small succulent in a terracotta pot, a framed photo of her mother standing in front of a church in Atlanta. She walked to the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and stood in the same steel box she had ridden up that morning. Her reflection looked back at her. Same blazer, same face, different everything. In the lobby, she paused to adjust the strap of her bag. It was there, near the security desk, that she noticed the man sitting in one of the low leather chairs by the window. He was reading something, a printed document, not a phone, and he had the kind of stillness about him that suggested he was used to waiting without being bothered by it. Dark suit, no tie. He looked like someone who had once made the decision that ties were optional for him personally. He was black, somewhere in his early 30s, and there was something in the way he sat, easy, unhurried, that had no trace of performance in it. He looked up, not at the room, at her. She must have been staring, because he held her gaze just a moment before the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like an acknowledgement. She looked away. She walked out through the revolving doors into the sharp autumn air of downtown Toronto, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with the canvas tote on her shoulder, and the weight of the morning settling across her chest. Then she straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and walked. She didn't know yet that the man by the window had been in the building for a reason. She didn't know that he had watched her walk to that elevator with a tote bag and a terracotta pot, and the particular posture of someone absorbing a blow without going down. She didn't know that he had seen everything, and that he would remember it. The woman who kept going. The first week without a job, Nadia cleaned her apartment. Not because it was dirty. It was already clean. She cleaned it because doing something with her hands kept the noise in her head at a manageable volume. She scrubbed the grout between the bathroom tiles with a toothbrush. She reorganized her bookshelf 3 times. She replanted the little succulent from the terracotta pot into a larger one she bought at a dollar store 2 blocks down from her building. On the 4th day, she updated her resume. On the 5th, she sent out 14 applications. By the end of the 2nd week, she had received 3 automated rejections, 2 silences that she had learned to read as the same thing, and 1 phone screen that went well until the recruiter mentioned, with the breezy confidence of someone who didn't realize what they were saying, that they'd reached out to a reference at Crestlane and were just doing their due diligence. She didn't get a call back after that. Nadia sat with that for a night, just one night. Then she got up and made coffee, and opened her laptop and started over. She wasn't naive about what had happened. She had been at Crestline long enough to know how the architecture of a place like that worked, who got updated files and who didn't, who got the benefit of the doubt in a room and who got made into an example. She knew that Harlan Cross had not humiliated her because she made a mistake. He had humiliated her because she was there, and because she was good, and because good was threatening when it wore her face. But knowing the reason for an injustice doesn't make you immune to the weight of it. What she did with that weight was her own choice. She chose to put it down. Not forever, she wasn't made of stone, but for long enough to think clearly. By the third week, she had picked up 2 freelance consulting contracts, one for a small logistics company that needed help reading its own cash flow, and one for a non-profit that was trying to restructure its operating costs before a grant renewal deadline. Neither paid what Crestline had. Together they covered rent and groceries, and left just enough for the occasional coffee that wasn't made in her own kitchen. She told herself that was enough. For now it was. The coffee shop was called Birch and Grounds. It was 3 blocks from her apartment, close enough to walk in a coat, far enough that it felt like leaving the house actually meant something. She had started coming here in the mornings to work, partly because her apartment felt too quiet, and partly because the woman who ran the counter, a broad-shouldered Haitian-Canadian named Denise, had a habit of slipping Nadia a second espresso shot unprompted and calling it the thinking fuel. It was a Tuesday morning, grey and cold, when she looked up from her laptop and saw him, the man from the Crestline lobby. He was standing at the counter ordering, his back to her, and she recognized him the way you recognize something you hadn't realized you'd filed away. Not immediately, but in layers. The particular set of his shoulders, the dark suit without a tie, the way he stood with his hands easy at his sides, like a man who had learned that stillness was its own kind of authority. He turned from the counter with his cup, and his eyes moved across the room and found her. A beat passed. He walked over. "You were at Crestline," he said. Not a question. "I was," she said. He nodded at the empty chair across from her. "May I?" She considered him for a moment. Something in her chest said yes before her brain had finished forming the thought. "Go ahead," she said. He sat. His name was Callum. He offered it simply, no last name yet, the way people sometimes do when they are curious whether their first name will tell you anything. It told her nothing she recognized. He had warm brown eyes and a way of listening that felt active, like he was actually there, actually in the conversation, not just waiting for his turn to speak. "You were carrying a plant," he said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "When you left the building, you had a canvas bag and a small plant in a terracotta pot." He said it without apology, because it wasn't strange to him. "I noticed. You were watching me leave. I was in the lobby. You walked through it." He paused. "You walked very straight." Nadia looked at him. "Is that something you usually lead with?" "It is when I mean it." He sipped his coffee. "What happened in there wasn't right." The words landed with a quiet weight. She hadn't expected them. She hadn't expected any of this. This man, this conversation, the particular way he said what happened in there wasn't right, as if he'd been thinking about it since he saw her walk out. "How much did you see?" she asked. "Enough. The glass walls on the 32nd floor don't offer much privacy." He set his cup down. "I had a meeting on that floor beforehand, different conference room. I heard part of what happened when I was waiting for the elevator." She was quiet for a moment. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I think it does. What I mean," she said carefully, "is that it happened, and I can't undo it, and I'm not the first person it's happened to in that building." He studied her. "What are you doing now?" "Consulting, freelance." She gestured at her laptop. "A logistics company and a non-profit." "Are you good at it?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. Because she was, and she knew it, and she had decided a long time ago that false modesty was a luxury she couldn't afford. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but something closer to recognition, like he'd been looking for an answer and had just found it in an unexpected place. "I believe you," he said. They talked for an hour, about finance mostly, the kind of conversation Nadia rarely got to have outside of boardrooms, where the vocabulary was shared but the power wasn't. Callum asked questions that showed he understood the field at a high level. Not analyst level, not the kind you learn from textbooks, but the structural, systemic kind. The kind you develop when you've made very large decisions for a very long time. She didn't think too much about that at the time. What she thought about was how strange it was to be talking to someone who looked at her the way he did, not like she was a diversity hire or a curiosity or a presence that needed to be managed, just like she was someone worth listening to. When she gathered her things to leave, he stood. "I'd like to talk again," he said. "About what?" "I'm not sure yet." He smiled, and it was the first time she'd seen it fully, warm and unhurried, a little uneven on one side. "But I think there's more." She put her laptop in her bag. "I'm here most mornings." "Then I'll see you most mornings," he said. She walked out into the grey cold of the Tuesday street, and she didn't look back. But she was smiling. Back at Crestline, 2 floors below where the walnut table gleamed under recessed lights, Preston Dale was in a meeting with Harlan Cross about the Meridian acquisition. The updated model, the one Nadia hadn't been sent, was on the screen. Numbers in neat columns, projections in clean lines. "She's gone," Harlan said. "Signed and out," said Preston. Harlan nodded, satisfied. "Good. Last thing we need is someone second-guessing the structure." He clicked forward to the next slide. "Now, the leverage ratio on the secondary tranche. Walk me through the hedge." Preston clicked his pen. "Right. So—" He stopped. He looked at the number on the screen. He looked at it again. "Harlan," he said slowly, "this ratio—" "What about it?" Preston set his pen down. "It's the same gap she identified." The room was very quiet. Harlan's jaw tightened. "Run it again," he said. "I've run it twice." Harlan Cross stared at the number on the screen and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Find a way to fix it that doesn't require us to go back." Preston looked at him. "There isn't one." Another silence. "Then find a different way to say what needs to happen," Harlan said. "That makes it look like it was always the plan." Preston nodded slowly. He clicked his pen. He did not mention Nadia's name again. But that number lived on the screen, and it carried her fingerprints all over it, whether anyone said so or not. That night, Nadia sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop, and the quiet that had stopped feeling like defeat and started feeling like something else, like space, like the particular kind of open that comes after something closes. She thought about Callum, about the way he had said, "I believe you," simply and without ceremony, the way someone says a thing when they mean it all the way down. She had not felt believed in a very long time. She opened a new document and started writing. Not a resume, not a cover letter. Something else. Notes, really, the kind you write when an idea is still forming, when you can feel it but can't quite hold it yet. She wrote for 2 hours. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed. Outside, downtown Toronto was doing what it always did. Moving, breathing, building, tearing down, starting over. The city didn't know her name. It didn't need to. She knew it herself. That was enough to keep going. What grows in the dark? It became a rhythm without either of them deciding it should. Tuesday, Thursday, sometimes Friday. Birch and Grounds at 8 in the morning, 2 cups of coffee, an hour that stretched into 90 minutes without either of them noticing, until Denise cleared her throat loudly from behind the counter and said, "I don't run a library, you know." Callum tipped well. Denise stopped clearing her throat. Nadia told herself it was just conversation, that she liked talking to someone who matched her speed, who didn't flinch when she used precise language or correct a simplification mid-sentence because precision mattered to her, and she wasn't willing to sand it down anymore. She had spent 7 years sanding herself down for rooms that didn't deserve the effort. She was done with that, but it was more than the conversation, and she knew it. It was the way he asked about the non-profit she was consulting for, not politely, the way people ask about things they don't intend to think about again, but with follow-up questions the next time he saw her. Specific ones, like he had actually turned it over in his mind after she left. It was the way he listened. It was the way he looked at her, like she was the most interesting problem he'd ever been given, and he wasn't in any hurry to solve her. "You're not from Toronto originally," she said one Thursday morning, 3 weeks into this thing they were not calling anything. "No," he said. "Accra. I came for university. Stayed." "Why?" He considered it. "The cold grows on you." "That's not a reason." He smiled into his cup. "No, it's not." A pause. "The work was here. And then the work became something else, and by the time I looked up I had roots." Nadia turned her cup in her hands. "What kind of work?" "Investment," he said simply. "Private equity mostly, early on. And now? Now it's more about where to put things than how to build them." She looked at him. There was something in that phrasing, the ease of it, the way he said where to put things the way most people say where to put their keys, that tugged at something in the back of her mind. She filed it away and didn't pull it out yet. "What about you?" he asked. "Where are you from?" "Atlanta," she said. "My mother still lives there. She's a school teacher, 4th grade." She smiled without meaning to. "She thinks everything I do with numbers is witchcraft." He laughed. "A real one, not the polished kind. The kind that catches and spills out before you've decided to let it." "Does she know what you actually do?" "She knows I'm good at it. She doesn't know what it is." Nadia paused. "She called me last week to say she'd been praying for me, and that God was about to open a door I didn't even know was there." "And what did you say?" "I said, 'Thank you, Mama.'" She looked at him. "And I meant it. Not because I'm sure about the door, but because she was sure, and sometimes that's enough." Callum was quiet for a moment. "Your mother sounds like someone worth listening to," he said. "She is," Nadia said. "She's the reason I walk straight." He looked at her then, the way he had looked at her in the lobby, like something was being confirmed, like he had suspected something, and this was the last piece of it clicking into place. She held his gaze. "Callum," she said, "who are you?" He didn't look away. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. You talk about investment like it's something you've been doing longer than you've been alive. You show up to Crestline Capital and sit in their lobby like you belong there more than they do. You ask questions like someone who knows the answers and is just checking whether I do too." She tilted her head. "So, who are you?" A beat of silence. "I'm someone who's still deciding how much to tell you," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "it's not. But it's the honest one." He leaned forward slightly. "Can you give me a little more time?" She studied him. She was not a woman who gave things without good reason. She had learned that the hard way, not just at Crestline, not just in boardrooms, but in living rooms and churches and family dinners where she'd handed pieces of herself to people who treated them carelessly. But there was nothing careless about Callum. "A little more time," she said. He nodded. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it the same way she had meant it when she told her mother the same words. All the way down. It was Denise who first mentioned it. 3 days later, a Friday morning, Nadia came in and sat at her usual table, and Denise came around the counter with a look on her face that wasn't her usual expression, which was somewhere between amused and tired. This was something else. "You got a minute?" Denise said. "Always." Denise sat across from her, which she had never done before. She folded her hands on the table. "How you worked at Crestline Capital?" "I did." "I have a cousin," Denise said slowly. "She works in finance, different firm. She heard something yesterday. I don't know if it's true, but I thought you should know." Nadia was very still. "Tell me." "Someone is saying you fabricated numbers," Denise said. "At your old job. That you built a fraudulent model and tried to pass it off as original analysis. It's going around in some of the firms downtown." She paused. "My cousin heard it from 2 different people." The room was quiet except for the espresso machine behind the counter. Nadia's hands were flat on the table. She thought about 11 days of work. She thought about the updated file she was never sent. She thought about Harlan Cross's voice saying that tells us something about where you are on the senior team. She thought about Preston Dale in a room somewhere, discovering that she had been right. "It's not true," she said. "I know it's not," Denise said simply. "I'm not asking, I'm telling you what's out there." Nadia nodded. Her jaw was tight. "Thank you," she said. Denise stood and went back behind the counter. She returned 2 minutes later with a double espresso she hadn't asked for and set it down without a word. Nadia sat with the information. She had been in financial services long enough to know what a whisper campaign looked like. She knew who had the reach for this. She knew who had the motive. The math was not complicated. Harlan Cross was not finished with her. He had fired her, which should have been enough. But she had been right, about the model, about the leverage gap. And somewhere in that building someone had run her numbers and gotten her answer, and Harlan Cross had buried it and told Preston Dale to make it look like it was always the plan. And now he was making sure no other firm downtown would give her a door to walk through. She opened her laptop. She was not going to cry. She was going to document everything. She started with the date she had requested the updated Meridian file from the shared drive and been told it was current. She had the email, she had the timestamp, she went through her inbox systematically, pulling every thread, every message, every silence where there should have been a response. It took her 4 hours. By the end of it, she had a folder with 17 documents that told a story very different from the one Harlan Cross was circulating downtown. She saved the folder in 3 places. She was methodical about it, the way she was methodical about everything that mattered. Then she sat back and looked at what she had built. It wasn't enough to do anything with yet, not legally, not professionally. But it was a foundation, and Nadia Okafor knew what you could build on a foundation. She was zipping her laptop bag when the door to the coffee shop opened and Callum walked in. He saw her face and stopped. He crossed the room without ordering and sat down across from her. "What happened?" he said. "Not what's wrong, not are you okay, what happened?" Because he could see something had, and he wanted to know what it was. She looked at him for a moment. Then she told him. All of it. Not just the whisper campaign, but Crestline. The file she wasn't sent. The meeting. What Harlan had said. What she had spent the last hour documenting. She had not told anyone the full version of this story. She told him. He listened without interrupting. No commentary, no throat-clearing, no performance of outrage. Just attention, the fullest kind. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You have documentation?" "Yes." "All of it?" "Enough." He nodded slowly. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, but something that had the shape of decision. The particular stillness of a man who has just decided what he is going to do and is in no hurry to announce it. "Good," he said. "Callum." She held his gaze. "What are you going to do?" He looked at her steadily. "I told you I needed a little more time." "You did?" "I think," he said carefully, "that time is almost up." She studied him. Outside, downtown Toronto moved in its usual way. Indifferent, efficient, enormous. Inside this small coffee shop that smelled like roasted beans and warm wood, the distance between 2 people compressed to almost nothing. "Tell me one thing," she said. "Are you someone who can actually do something about this?" He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. She believed him. She didn't know yet how much of an understatement that was. The name behind the quiet. She found out on a Wednesday, not from him, not yet. From her laptop screen at 7:43 in the morning, while she was drinking her first cup of coffee at the kitchen table in her apartment. She had been scanning the financial news the way she always did, a habit so old it had become involuntary, like breathing. The headline was on the business section of the Globe and Mail. OSE Capital acquires stake in 3 downtown Toronto firms. CEO Callum OSE signals broader restructuring plans. She read it twice. Then she set her cup down. Then she read it a 3rd time. There was a photograph. It was him, unmistakable even in a formal press image, something about him that didn't translate to performance no matter the context. Dark suit, no tie. That particular stillness. He was standing in front of a building she recognized as one of the towers on Bay Street, and the caption read, "Callum OSE, founder and CEO of OSE Capital, following the announcement of the firm's latest acquisition portfolio." She sat very still for a long moment. OSE Capital. She knew the name. Everyone in Canadian finance knew it. one of the largest independent private equity firms in the country. Not flashy, not loud, the kind of operation that moved like water and was 3 steps ahead before anyone noticed it had entered the room. Callum Osei. She had been having coffee with Callum Osei for 3 weeks, and he had told her his name was Callum and that he worked in investment. She almost laughed. Instead, she picked up her phone and typed, "I read the Globe this morning. 3 minutes passed, then I was going to tell you today." She stared at the message. Then she typed, "Were you?" "Yes. I've been trying to figure out the right way to say it. You could have just said it." A pause. Then, "I know. I was afraid of what it would change." She thought about that. She understood it. The way conversations shifted once power became visible, how people adjusted and overcorrected. She had always been on the lower end of that differential. She had never considered what it felt like from the other side. She typed, "Does it change anything?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Does it?" he wrote back. She thought about 3 weeks of Tuesday and Thursday mornings, about the way he asked follow-up questions, about the Crestline story she had told him, and how he had listened, not like a man calculating what to do with the information, but like someone who simply wanted to understand. She typed, "No." Then she got up, got dressed, and went to Birch and Grounds. He was already there. He stood when she walked in, which he had never done before. She crossed the room and sat across from him and Denise, watching from behind the counter, with the particular attentiveness of a woman who has been quietly tracking a story, developing in her establishment for weeks, made herself very busy with the espresso machine. "Callum Osei," Nadia said. "Yes." "Founder and CEO of Osei Capital." "Yes." "Net worth," she started. "I'd rather not," he said quietly. She looked at him. He wasn't embarrassed. She could see that. It was something else. Something closer to tired. Like the number was a wall he had spent a long time on the wrong side of. "Okay," she said. He exhaled. "I should have told you sooner. I know that." "You should have." "I was—" He stopped, chose his words. "When you meet people, and they know who you are before they know anything else about you, the conversation becomes about that. Every question has a different gravity. Every silence means something different." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted to know you without that. I wanted you to know me without it." A pause. "I'm sorry I let it go as long as I did." Nadia was quiet for a moment. She thought about 7 years of being in rooms where people had decided who she was before she opened her mouth. She thought about what it might feel like to have your name be the thing that preceded you everywhere, so heavy and so large that the actual person underneath it had to work twice as hard just to be seen. She didn't think that made the two things equal, but she understood it. "I'm not angry," she said finally. "I'm adjusting." "That's fair." "I have questions. Ask them." She leaned forward slightly. "Why were you at Crestline that day?" He held her gaze. "I was in early-stage discussions about a potential acquisition." She felt something shift in her chest. "Crestline?" "Not the firm itself initially, one of their portfolio assets." A pause. "But after what I saw that day, after what I heard, I started looking more closely at the firm itself, at its leadership." He was measured, deliberate. "What I found in Crestline's internal risk models over the past 6 months is a pattern of misrepresented projections, the kind that would concern any serious buyer or any regulator." She was very still. "The leverage gap," she said, "among other things. I'm going to do what makes sense from an investment standpoint," he said carefully, "and what makes sense is that Crestline Capital, under its current leadership, is a firm with serious structural problems that its CEO has been actively concealing." He paused. "A firm like that either gets fixed or it gets acquired at a price that reflects its actual condition, not the one Harlan Cross has been selling to the market." Nadia held his gaze. "That's why you asked if I had documentation," she said. "Yes. You're not just protecting me." "No," he said quietly, "but I am doing that too." She sat with that for a moment. Outside, a streetcar rattled past on King Street, heavy and familiar, the sound of a city going about its business. Inside, the world was considerably smaller. "Callum," she said, "I need you to understand something. Tell me. Whatever happens with Crestline, that's your world, and your decision, and your capital. I'm not asking you to do anything on my behalf." Her voice was calm and clear. "What happened to me was wrong, but I don't want to be someone's cause. I don't want to be rescued." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "It's me doing something I would have done anyway," he said, "and being glad that you're in the room when it happens." A long silence. Nadia looked at him. She looked at his hands around his coffee cup, the particular steadiness of them. She looked at his face, which was open in a way that she had not seen on very many faces in her life, the kind of open that costs something. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Denise arrived at the table with 2 cups she hadn't ordered, set them down without a word and walked away. 3 days later, Crestline Capital received a formal acquisition offer from Osei Capital. It landed on a Friday afternoon when Harlan Cross was in a leadership team meeting on the 42nd floor. Petra brought it in on a single sheet of paper, an executive summary, clean and brief, the way Osei Capital always communicated, and placed it on the table in front of Harlan without a word. Harlan picked it up. He read it. He read it again. The number was fair. That was the thing about Callum Osei. His offers were always fair, which meant you couldn't dismiss them without looking like you were being irrational. And looking irrational was the one thing Harlan Cross was constitutionally incapable of doing in front of his board. The offer was fair and it was final, and attached to it was a rider, a standard due diligence clause, except that this one specifically named the Meridian acquisition file and the secondary debt tranche and requested full documentation going back 11 months. Harlan set the paper down. He looked at Preston Dale, who was sitting across the table. Preston looked back at him. Neither of them said the name, but it was in the room. "Get legal on the phone," Harlan said very quietly. "Yes," said Preston. Harlan looked at the number on the page. It was not a bad number. In fact, the best anyone was going to offer a firm carrying the problems Crestline now had. He was not stupid enough to misread that. He had spent his entire career as the man who held power in the room. He had spent it carelessly, on small cruelties, on the satisfaction of sending someone out with a canvas tote bag and a terracotta pot. He had not been watching the horizon. He picked up his pen. For the first time in a very long time, his hand was not entirely steady. Nadia found out the same way she had found out about Callum, from her phone, this time a message that came in on a Saturday morning while she was at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee and a notebook full of ideas that were starting to feel like more than ideas. "The offer has been submitted. Board meeting is Monday. I'd like you to be there." She stared at the message. Then she typed, "In what capacity?" His response came in under a minute. "In whatever capacity you want. But I've been looking at what you built at Crestline, the original model, the documentation, the gap you identified. I've also been looking at what you've done for the non-profit and the logistics firm in the last 6 weeks." A pause. "Nadia, I want to offer you a position, head of risk analysis for the Crestline integration, if the board accepts Monday." She sat very still. She thought about an October morning and a canvas tote and a terracotta pot, 11 days of work, a man who had laughed, a room full of people who had let him. Her mother's voice, "God is about to open a door you didn't even know was there." She had not seen this door. She typed back, "I'll be there." Outside, Toronto was bright and cold and full of possibility. Nadia Okafor picked up her pen and she started writing. The room remembers now, Monday morning. 42nd floor. The same walnut table, the same leather chairs, the same light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, like the building had no idea what was about to happen inside it. Harlan Cross arrived first. He always did. He sat at the head of the table the way he always had, broad, silver-haired, certain the room belonged to him because it always had. The board filed in. Preston Dale, Gerald, the others. Then the door opened again. Callum Osei walked in. Dark suit, no tie. Unhurried, quiet, carrying the particular authority of a man who has never needed to announce himself. Behind him walked Nadia Okafor, burgundy blazer, the same one, pressed crisp. She carried a leather portfolio, and she walked very straight. Harlan looked at her. Recognition, confusion, then something colder, the beginning of understanding. "Mr. Cross," Callum said, settling one seat down from the head and somehow making it feel like the head anyway. "Thank you for convening on short notice." "What is she doing here?" Harlan said, flat. "Ms. Okafor is head of risk analysis for the Crestline integration. Effective today." Callum looked at the board. "Which I'm told is a formality at this point." They nodded. Every one of them. Harlan's jaw tightened. "This is done," Callum said pleasantly. "The acquisition closed Friday evening. You were notified by legal at 6:14 p.m. A pause. "I believe you signed." The room went very quiet. Preston Dale studied the table. Gerald had gone the color of old paper. The others sat frozen, absorbing the reversal of everything they thought they knew. Harlan looked at Nadia. She looked back at him. She did not smile. She simply held his gaze with the same steadiness she'd held it the morning he'd laughed at her work and sent her out with a canvas tote and a terracotta pot. She had walked very straight then. She was walking very straight now. "Ms. Okafor," Callum said, without looking away from Harlan, "would you like to walk the board through the Meridian file?" She opened her portfolio. "I would," she said, and she began. Afterward, when the board had gone and Harlan Cross had walked through the door with the stiffness of a man who finally understood what it felt like to be made small, Callum stood by the windows. Nadia came to stand beside him. Below them, the city moved the way it always had, indifferent, enormous, full of people starting over. "How do you feel?" he asked. She considered it honestly. "Like myself," she said. "Fully." He looked at her, the uneven smile, warm and unhurried. "That's everything," he said. She looked out at the October light, that high, quiet kind that felt like a different sort of air. Her mother had been right. The door had been there all along. She just hadn't been able to see it yet. Sometimes the room that dismissed you becomes the room that defines you, because you never stopped being exactly who you were. The end.